Ladies and gentlemen, we shall now commence the seminar. I, Mohammad, on behalf of President CAS, Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan and CAS team, welcome you all to CAS seminar on the US Indo-Pacific Shift, Risk and Opportunities for Pakistan. CAS is an independent and non-partisan think tank that envisions to serve as a thought leader. Its mission is to provide independent insight and analysis on aerospace and international security issues of both an immediate and long-term concern. Its core values are independence, analytical rigor, and foresight. Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan would be delivering the opening remarks in today's seminar. Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan is President, Center for Aerospace and Security Studies. He has rich experience in aviation and industrial management, diplomacy, and negotiations. During his service, he remained on various important command and staff appointments, including Vice Chief of the Air Staff and Chairman, Pakistan Aeronautical Complex Board. He has also served as Pakistan's Air Attaché in New Delhi, India. He is the co-author of 2 books, The Aviation City and Milestones about the Growth of Military Aviation Industry in Pakistan and its Way Forward. So without further ado, I now invite Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan to please deliver his opening remarks.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Honorable Senator Shari Rehman, Admiral Mohammad Asif Sandila, Ambassador Inam al-Haq, Ambassador Richard Olson, Ambassador Jalil Abbas Jilani, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are since you are alive. The end of Cold War towards the terminal phase of the last century had heralded hopes around the world that humanity will witness peace, progress, and prosperity. While the international politics was expected to be based on multilateralism and conflict resolution. However, after a brief and a very eventful era of unipolarity, primarily spent on global war and terror, the 21st century has witnessed a major shift in the center of gravity of the global politics, wealth, and security, from Atlantic to Asia Pacific. Since the announcement of US pivot to Asia policy by President Obama, the strategic balance of the entire world has undergone profound and rapid changes. While the intensifying and widening US-China competition in the Asia Pacific has emerged as one of the most critical issues in the international politics. As one of the most critical issues in international politics, which could affect the security architecture, peace and progress of the entire world and indeed Asia Pacific. The rise of China is being perceived in the West as a direct challenge to the American global preeminence and supremacy. The US has intensified its diplomatic engagements for alliance formation, close security cooperation, and large-scale military buildup in Asia Pacific as part of her Indo-Pacific strategy. According to some of the reports, the salient interest of United States Indo-Pacific strategy are defend American homeland, and citizens abroad and prevent spread of nuclear weapons and its means of delivery. 2, preserve US economic, diplomatic, and military access to the most populous region of the world and more than 1/3 of the global economy, and maintain US primacy in the region while protecting American core values and liberties at home. We are witness the implementation of this US Indo-Pacific strategy in the form of an accelerated regional alliance formation, close security cooperation, and large-scale military build-up in Asia-Pacific. In contrast, China has been attempting to reject these Western concerns by presenting its own alternate vision for the world based on its 5 principles of coexistence. These include mutual respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, mutual non-aggression, non-interference in each other's affairs. 4th, equality and mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence. In addition, Chinese President Mr. Xi has also presented a new concept of building a community of shared future for mankind, which emphasizes 1, equal sovereignty of all countries. 2, non-interference in the internal affairs of others. 3, joint democratic management of the global affairs by countries rather than through the dictates of the most powerful states. 4th, win-win cooperation between the countries. 5, to build a world of common prosperity and treating the diversity of civilizations not as a source of conflict, but as an engine driving the advancement of humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, these contrasting worldviews by 2 contemporary great powers also reflect 2 different civilization cultures and approaches towards the world politics. In the geopolitical sphere, the US-China competition is expanding, deepening, and accelerating. The dangerous trend is weakening international institutions and reducing diplomacy merely to alliance formation, rather than for the pursuit of conflict resolution and peace building. The intense geopolitics is playing out in the form of Western challenges to Beijing's One China policy and territorial claims in South China Sea, alliance shifting of NATO, and alliance building in the form of Quad 2+0, and AUKUS. In addition, this politics is also being waged in the form of the contentious issues of human rights, media freedom, US support for Indian permanent membership of the United States Security Council, the international neglect of the Kashmir issue, media, and psychological warfare. In the geo-economic realm, the increasing tariff competition poses challenges to the concept of free trade around the world, and the single largest bilateral trade relationship between Washington and Beijing. This could not only affect the probability of manufacturing and services industries, but also the quality of life of citizens of both the powers. What is more worrying for the rest of the world and free trade is the fact that various countries around the world are being discouraged not to cooperate with China or to do business with Chinese companies. But this trade war of particular concern to South Asia, Central Asia, and West Asia, and especially Pakistan, because it could affect the future of economic corridors. Western concept of B3W announced by G7 countries in June 21 is basically aimed at countering the BRI. It also indicates that the world's geoeconomics is increasingly being influenced by geopolitics. Moreover, the increasing coercive FATF review and strangulating conditions by the international financial institutions also seem to be influenced by the global geopolitics. This raises questions and concerns about the independence, integrity, and transparency of these institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, the third dimension of the US-China competition is the geostrategic, which is not only more worrying, but also very destabilizing and dangerous for peace, security, and stability of Asia-Pacific, and particularly of South Asia and Pakistan. The Indo-US shift has allowed India to attract immense American political and diplomatic support. Exceptional security and defense assistance, along with close intelligence cooperation. This facilitates, augments, and advances New Delhi's own primary objective of becoming a regional hegemon in South Asia, rather than help contain China. The US Indo-Pacific Strategy has unfortunately helped India divert the US attention away from Washington's own lasting interests and consistent commitment towards helping maintain peace, security, stability in South Asia. The US diplomatic support for Indian membership in the UN Security Council and strategic export control regimes, exceptional access to latest military technologies, defense equipment, and intelligence sharing pose grave challenges to South Asian security and stability and deserves a timely policy review. In addition, the swift strategic alliance building in the form of Quad 2.0, AUKUS, and agreements such as COMCASA, BECA, LAMOA also raise critical questions about the future balance of power in Asia-Pacific and South Asia. Furthermore, large-scale strategic arms buildup, over a dozen nuclear deals, sharing of sensitive and cutting-edge technologies related to ballistic missile defense, hypersonic missiles, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, cyber, and space capabilities, sale of P-8, C-17, AH-64, and Chinook helicopters to India poses grave challenges to the balance of power, strategic stability, peace and security in Asia-Pacific, South Asia, but also raise serious concerns about the future of non-proliferation regime. The unilateral US approach towards India is also very destabilizing in the form of negative implications for the conflict resolution in South Asia, making the Indian leadership more arrogant and reluctant to resume dialogue with Pakistan for resolving outstanding issues, particularly the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. It has been our emboldened Indian military, and encouraged them to coin dangerous doctrines and strategies, divorced from the critical need of strategic restraint and demonstrate irresponsible strategic behavior towards smaller neighbors, particularly Pakistan. Ladies and gentlemen, although Chinese economy is currently ranked number 2 to the United States, but is expected to become the leading economy by 2030. While China is paying significant attention to its defense sector, the technological advancements and numerical superiority of the United States is likely to help retain its supremacy in the conventional as well as strategic domains for a foreseeable future. Therefore, is it safe to assume that both superpowers are expected to contest each other in their respective areas of advantage of a battle of influence? In the Cold War II, that seems to have already started. However, their immense bilateral economic integration and nuclear deterrence are expected to restrain them from direct conflict. The recent vital summit meeting between US and Chinese presidents held on 15th November also underscored the importance of managing this competition strategically and strategic risks responsibly. Ladies and gentlemen, today at this international seminar organized by CAS with the help of a very illustrious panel of Pakistani and foreign experts, we will try to improve our collective understanding of the risks and opportunities that US Indo-Pacific shift presents to the world, the region, and Pakistan. But please allow me to share a few questions and issues that I expect our worthy panelists to consider and address in order to make this intellectual discourse more substantive and result-oriented. A. Question 1. Will the US play its due role in facilitating and encouraging the resumption of peaceful composite dialogue between India and Pakistan in order to support conflict resolution as well as help maintain stability and peace in South Asia? 2. What lessons has the US learned from its experience of recent conflicts in terms of war termination strategy? Question 3. While the US continues to mainly rely on its hard power in the Indo-Pacific strategy, or will it consider leading the world in addressing the global challenges of hunger, poverty, disease, and climate change? 4. Is it possible for the world powers and their allies to offer a fresh look at Asia-Pacific as a zone of immense and untapped geo-economic opportunities rather than a theater of geostrategic competition? Question 5. Will the panel like to analyze the dichotomy between the values being practiced and promoted within India and Western liberal ideals? And my last question is, can the world powers share knowledge, technology, and wealth with developing world and different value systems more equitably and fairly in order to achieve world peace and progress and reduce wars and exploitations? Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you all to this seminar, and true to the CAS traditions, look forward to very rich, candid, and insightful intellectual discourse that can help us all better understand the changing dynamics of Indo-Pacific shift, but also explore the identify that useful policy options that can make this world, the region, and our country more safe, secure, stable, prosperous, and positively relevant. I thank you all.
Thank you, Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan, for your opening remarks. Moving forward, ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Sitara Noor would be moderating today's session. Sitara Noor is a senior researcher at the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies. Previously, she has worked at the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation and Pakistan Nuclear Regulatory Authority. She is a former visiting fellow at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation, Sandila National Labs, and the Stimson Center. I now invite Ms. Sitara Noor to please take over as the moderator for the discussion.
Thank you, Mohammad, for the very kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to moderate this very important discussion entitled US Indo-Pacific Shift, Risks and Opportunities for Pakistan. President Cass has underlined the importance of the subject in his opening remarks, and now we are going to analyze how the strategic landscape of the region is undergoing profound changes and its implication for the region as well as for Pakistan. As President Cass has noted, the bilateral relations of the US and China have evolved from being competitive to confrontational. In the past few years, the rise of China in the economic and military domain is perceived as a direct threat to the American supremacy. Pakistan attaches highest importance to its relationship with China and wants to have a broad-based relationship with the United States as well. As an important regional player, Pakistan is directly affected by the developments in the region, as highlighted by the President Cass in his opening remarks. Pakistan should definitely continue to balance its relationship with both the US and China. And despite the shrinking space for diplomacy, Islamabad must stay on course and avoid being caught in the crossfire of this great power rivalry. To discuss this complex emerging situation, we have a stellar group of experts with us today. In today's proceeding, the session will commence with a keynote address by Senator Sherry Rehman, and it will be followed by a topical presentation by our worthy speakers. After that, we'll have a question and answer session. Each speaker is requested to take for about 15 minutes so that we have sufficient time for the question and answer sessions afterward. Without further ado, I invite Senator Sherry Rehman, who is the keynote speaker for today's session. Senator Rehman is the chair of the Foreign Affairs Standing Committee in the Senate and president of Jinnah Institute, Pakistan's first women Senate opposition leader, Vice President, Pakistan's People's Party parliamentarian. Ms. Rehman served as Pakistan's ambassador to the United States from 2011 to 2013 and served as the Federal Minister for Information and Broadcasting from 2008 to 2009. Ms. Rehman, I request you to kindly come over to the podium and deliver your keynote address.
Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Good evening, good afternoon, and Assalamu alaikum. First of all, let me thank Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan for the very comprehensive girding, shall we say, to the session, and for inviting me here. I am in the presence of Ambassador Inam ul Haq and Admiral Sandila. Ambassador Olson, I believe, is online somewhere in the virtual universe. And of course, the Jilanis have always been my bosses in one or some or the other iteration, and there's Jalil, Abbas, Jilani. So thank you very much for having me here. It's a very humbling experience to be speaking to an august company as this. And the questions posed were interesting, and I think we'll leave them for later, but obviously some of them I will try to speak to over here. The keynote really should focus on the Indo-Pacific shift and obviously risks and opportunities for Pakistan. I tend to see opportunities in every crisis and challenge, but let's look at those later. There is clearly a return to geopolitics and the primacy of geoeconomics. The history, as Francis Fukuyama suggested, is not proceeding in its ineluctable advance of capital and liberalism triumphing as a global value system. That's all over. History did not end. It kind of imploded on all of us. So I want to take the opportunity to look at great power shifts and global inflection points as challenging nodes of history, not just in pure strategic terms, but specifically in the Indo-Pacific. I feel that these terminologies, Cold War and group of X, Y, Z, there are many of these. To me, are particularly resistant to textbook pigeonholing. It is too early in the day to decide if this is a battle, a Cold War, or a contest. It clearly is a contest, but let's look at its parameters, because these are prefaced in the 21st century by great meta trends. Beyond the strategic, there are meta trends that underpin not just complexity of purpose, but changes that tend to bend history in non-traditional paths. So the strategic is a part of it. Allow me first to say that 3 meta trends capture my attention. One is the digital age, which is transforming the nature of power as we know it, because conflict at the end of the day, the Thucydides trap, the challenge from Sparta to Athens, or Athens to Sparta, it's Athens to Sparta, right? Yes, the challenge was Athens to Sparta, the status quo power. All those are undergirded by notions of power, which itself is changing in the 21st century. And it is transformed by the digital age, and the impact this will have on states exercising both hard and soft power will be shaped by this changing notion of power. Power is also defined by the digital age now, which has changed the way information is decentralized. And while demographies of dissent use it to effect important change, they use it to democratize, they use it to lead revolutions, they use it to crowdsource funding, they use it for platforms of enabling democracy, of enabling inclusion, of rights. It has also changed the way other collectives, because we are the human race, respond in curated patterns of altered truths. And there is a reason this is called the post-truth era. So these truths and the contest over truths, information, knowledge is actually very intense, and it has altered the way power is exercised. Why this is important here is because this takes away multilateralism's capacity to respond rationally to crisis. The world we imagine ourselves modeling and gaming responses, particularly strategic, is based on rational choices. Those rational choices are not always open to exercise in today's digital age. And I'll tell you why I think so. The post-truth society has also created legitimacy assets for authoritarian actors, such as the far right, examples being the cult politics of Narendra Modi or even Donald Trump. And signature sound bites are created to define and swing entire populations to the right in global politics. This has an effect on choices we make, on strategic options available to countries, on alliance building, and the survival of the rules-based order, the old rules-based order as we know it. This is a meta trend because it impacts our discussion of strategic spoken wheel templates by imposing a new layer of irrationality on the decision matrix of powerful and not so powerful nation states. While populist domestic policy, and we know that domestic policy often keeps foreign policy on a leash the world over. We see it in India every time there's a big election coming up, the rhetoric against Pakistan comes up, turns up, the state terrorism in Kashmir surges. If there's a UP election, you'll always see it. If there's an election in the United States, you will see the bipartisan divide becoming even more polarized, and a great deal of what was agreed to in times of relative calm falls through the cracks. So rationality is important. Looking at populist politics is important. And understanding that never in recent history has the space for the rational shrunk this much. The 21st century and the 20th century are fundamentally different. The 20th century was defined by the wars and the lessons from that war and the international architecture that accrued from that war. The exception being the Weimar Republic, which never pretended to be rational. Hitler's republic never pretended to be rational. It only relied on the naked power of it being great, of the race, the uber-Aliceness of it all. But it was not dealing with today's complexity and interdependence. There's a point to be made here, because complexity and interdependence is the new normal, or shall we say, the post-normal. The second meta trend is epicentered in the era of post-normality, as I call it, that the pandemic has brought to the 21st century. This includes reassessments of unchecked human consumption, failures of capitalism, eroding multilateralism, and a search for multipolarity amid growing strategic complexity and black swan events that limit the use of power as we know it. Now, this may address some of the questions the speaker has asked before, but not all of them. The lessons from the pandemic are still being absorbed by proponents of hard power who continue to see narrow security doctrines as the foremost path to global supremacy. Believe me, everyone who is able to exercise hard power, bolstered by the military-industrial complex that hard power works with, is going to use it. But coming back to that later. This may not include the Biden White House, but it is yet to respond to the need to invest in eco-diplomacy and statecraft for the post-normal 21st century. Yes, at COP26, they have made commitments, but they have tempered those as well. The White House that built, for instance, the Tarbela Dam in Pakistan is not on call anymore for struggling, browning economies such as ours. But China is positioning itself as the leader of the developing world with an eco-growth model of interdependency and some level of acknowledgement of national sovereignties. The third meta trend is as contested as it is existential. It is contested. It should not be. It is linked to the second one, but has clear parameters of potential ruin attached to its own momentum of action over a terrifying access of accelerated time, and that is climate stress. If this group of people, of decision-making, empowered people, has not understood the power of climate change and the trauma and geostrategic trauma and costs it will entail, then it is time to do so, gentlemen and ladies. The age of carbon should be over for the human race, and it is not an option anymore for states to exercise, but it continues to be. Again, recourse to the the myopia that breeds from the irrational, and the moving away from the future of the human race. This is again not the 20th century when rules were made after ruinous wars. Those lessons are kind of forgotten. So it has great divisive power, as all reduction in resources do. It will do the one thing it does to everyone. It will reduce resources, and it will of course inflame hunger and anger, and anger induces conflict. So it is to be part of the conflict dynamic in every assessment, in my view. It is shaping also the world into new colonies of extractive states versus low-intensity polluters. That would be us. Pakistan is a low-intensity polluter. Next to us is a high-intensity. It's a big carbon state, India. China is another one. And of course, the United States and much of Europe. Those are, and we pay the higher global costs for the fossil fuel industrial complex that built hard power, that is still using that hard power. So, in a rational world, the developing states would be clubbing their advocacy in groups of negotiating blocs. And have we ever done that? Yes, we've done that at the WTO long ago, where India and Pakistan came together to secure the patent for the basmati rice, for instance. And the world should be talking about these things: how to trade, how to maximize agri-commodities, and various other potential resources that we can maximize our national power with. It is the export that will maximize your national power and bring down the competing dollar to your currency, or rather raise your currency. In a rational world, we would be able to discuss our depleting water resources. We share this basin, some of it with Afghanistan, some with India. I know this is not what you asked me to speak about, but I think meta trends will define and shape both hostilities and opportunities for much of our region, including the Indo-Pacific. Now, strategically, therefore, the axis of difference in this post-normal world as we know it, and I use the term post-normal to disrupt the idea of a world architecture that will work according to 20th century expectations. It will not, as I understand it. I could be totally wrong, but it will not. Global diplomacy doesn't work that way anymore. History has bent itself to new shapes, and the failure of capitalism is just that. It's the failure of capitalism, but there is no replacement for it. I flag all these trends to mark the gravity of risk Pakistan faces in a world hurtling towards both strategic exclusions, binaries, and of course all this meta change in the mix. Look at the risks. If there's one thing Americans agree upon across the bitter political divide, partisan divide, it is identifying the rise of China as a threat to their hegemony as sole superpower. This has both meaning and impact, obviously, in the region we discussed today. Now, the Trump administration stopped calling this maritime region the Asia-Pacific. If you recall, it used to be called the Asia-Pacific, this entire region spanning two oceans. It is now called the Indo-Pacific. Why? Because names and labels have the power to colonize an entire narrative, and that is what is going on here. It is sequestered now, unlike carbon, which should be sequestered. We need to learn these terms. It is sequestered now to the Indian Ocean, which has dominance or seeks to have dominance over it in its partnership with the United States. The Biden administration has continued that and ensured that contestations in what they now call the Indo-Pacific emphasize the strength and durability to their commitment of bringing India in as the strategic hedge. It is the strategic hedge to China's ambitions, which is why it will not be dispensed with. Right? The hedge part makes it indispensable for now. That poses a new set of problems for Pakistan, which stands in different levels of peril in the region and its larger economic and maritime comfort zone. When India gets the comfort of Teflon coating its impunity as a regional aggressor, Teflon coating, its impunity is guaranteed. Unfortunate, immoral, amoral, but there it is. It has impunity as a regional aggressor, as a state terrorizer, and as an actor at large on the geopolitical stage. Why? Because it is the new hedge to for American ambition, and obviously against China's slow but steady climb to the new Asian century. Its actions will become more disrespectful of international law as we know it, and you will not see much said or done about it. So there it is. Those are the expectations of India. The impacts on Kashmir and Jammu are very clear, in inverse proportion to the space and options for normalization of the region as we know it. Normalization is a bizarre term used only here in South Asia, where you have to bring the other state in a constant conflict dynamic with you down to a level where some strategic and tactical agreements can be reached. Now it is beyond strategic, barely tactical, line of control issues to stop the killing of innocent civilians on those lines of control are discussed. That too is important. So South Asia becomes overshadowed and defined by, and so does the choices South Asia can make, whereas Pakistan remains obviously straddled by this hostile neighbor who is unwilling to leverage economic diplomacy, who is unwilling to change its threat postures, and who is unwilling to even suggest, at least under the Modi dispensation, any change in what its escalating dynamics are in Kashmir. So, the United States has clearly made a decision to ally strategically across multiple domains with India, not just one. It is in space, it is in defense, it is in the maritime sphere. These three we all know. But we also know that the United States remains bound to India through powerful Indian diasporas. And this is an economic dominance related to its markets as well as its politics. But fifthly, what is key is American Indian, fourthly, dominance of cultural power, where in its marketplace of intellectual and political expression, the Indians now work on big ticket US think tanks. This is the knowledge industry, and it's huge. Big ticket US think tanks as advocates of joint policy at joint forums. The importance of this cannot be underemphasized. This is huge. There is Carnegie India, there's Brookings India, they speak the same voice, they host the same tents, and they are advancing each other's strategic, tactical, economic, cultural, and other visions together. It is ineluctably now in one seam. This is important because America still dominates the knowledge economy globally, as well as the hard power of old-fashioned coercive 20th century power. So where does that leave us? Is hard power then no longer important? Another question you ask. Not at all. It is decisive in many domains, particularly the maritime littorals we trade in. And Pakistan, of course, sees most of its trade, at over 90% of its trade, come in through its ports, Karachi and Port Qasim. Gwadar is not particularly operationalized yet for that, but that is the reality. The vulnerability is clear. While, on the other hand, the Quad mentioned and AUKUS, the $66 billion AUKUS, marked the rise and re-emergence of old-fashioned hard power. This is 20th century hard power re-emerging based on this American neuralgia to contain the rise of China in what could be the Asian century. And it will tempt many countries to make umbrella choices based on military binaries. So in the security domains, countries are sorely tempted to seek patrons and larger powers that can give them an umbrella, a security umbrella, much like Pakistan did in the early 1950s in seeking the security umbrella of the United States. But for America, by and large, Pakistan continues to be viewed through the lens of Afghanistan, and therefore could have run its utility and sell-by date for a few years, because of course, as we know, America has no policy for Afghanistan. It has no South Asia policy. It only has an India policy, and is seen as mistrustful and transactional, or rather what we call a frenemy. An enemy one day and perhaps a friend. An enemy maybe, 25 days of the month, maybe 2-3 days a friend. So it is the anti-hero of allies. We are the anti-hero of allies. We've been allies forever, for as long as I can remember. Well, longer. But we are still distrustful, and there is a huge and growing and publicly curated trust deficit between the two countries, specifically over Afghanistan and many other things. So at the moment, Washington is distracted and confused, which is not always a bad thing, but it's also angry and confused. It's angry at itself, It's angry at its own choices, at the money it spent in the forever wars, at the way the exit from Afghanistan was handled as worse than a post-Saigon moment. So the ignominy has been crushing, and it wants a scalp. That's what societies do. So if it can't get one here, it is looking within itself. The good news is that it's still a large representative democracy. It's noisy and it's not one-dimensional. And the United States Congress has asked for very hard-hitting and deeply centered questions on what went wrong in Afghanistan for the last 20 years, from September 11th to now. So they may be focusing some of their guns to their own institutions. But Pakistan has remained in the narrative, public narrative, for years as a potential and often in the mix scapegoat for anyone else's failures in Afghanistan. In this construct, where Pakistan is seen as China's dependent port of call, if not linchpin ally, in giving it access to Gwadar, makes America even more nervous. It's Gwadar that actually gives China the ability through BRI to connect itself over the Eurasian landmass as a two-ocean power for the first time in its history. It will then be, if it connects the Eurasian landmass, the Pacific and the Atlantic, make it a two-ocean power, open for trade, for business, and for the ineluctable advance of its economic belt and road and other diplomacy. So this is what is also powering the anxiety in Washington. One big decision then we have to make is, what do we do? I'm not going to carry on. I think the point here is to talk about our own options now. Are there any zero-sum choices? Is this a zero-sum world? I don't think so. I don't think that we have to choose one over another. That is why I shy away from calling it a Cold War, because it's convenient. It feels like a Cold War, looks like a Cold War, doesn't often act like a Cold War, though. In 20th century terms, maybe it's a new one. But in this particular Cold War, unlike the Soviet Union, which imploded in the end ultimately, and we had a great part in it, the two powers are contesting different things. One is using economic diplomacy, the other is using, or the kind of power that America used to use, and the other is relying more and more on a mix of military as well as international power. And it has that power. We can't walk away from it. The temptation to seek one security umbrella, economic and defensive, is as old as our nation state, and it is, to human nature, very tempting. Walk away from it, because that is not the new world. The smart option is to heed actually what the Chinese foreign minister said yesterday or day before at the ASEAN. They said, don't make countries choose between alliances and blocs. Now that is called smart diplomacy and smart foreign policy. They are not forcing choices on you, which is very important. It is the containment of China that is forcing choices, not China forcing choices. So that's a very important distinction to make. And the cookie may not crumble entirely against us in that light. Why I think he's absolutely right is because if you are an ally of one country and you can't remain engaged with potential rivals. The new model of, if you want to call it the Cold War, can I get some water, is about actually reshaping one's own national interests and negotiating with rivals. I mean, look at the United States and China. They are actually the largest trading partners for each other. So that continues while the decoupling is going on. Thank you very much. While the decoupling is going on, you know, the Huawei and all that, you still have them trading with each other. And you see them trying to build, as Biden called it, guardrails against catastrophic disruption. So they're carrying on. India and China are carrying on with big trading agendas. So the binaries are not where they used to be. So, excuse me. If China is the connector in all this equation, with BRI as its big continental zipper, it's a continental zipper as they see it, for pushing eco-diplomacy and leadership, then America is still the big military power for a long time, with preeminence, domain dominance. And it will continue to be that. It will continue to plow endless resources into this military dominance. And it also has the multilateral system, which Pakistan has exposure to, which would be FATF, which would be IMF, it would be the World Bank. I won't go into all our exposure on that. So here we are, as a rent-seeking economy, quite exposed to the multilateral system. While we shake our fist at it, we're quite exposed to it. And exposure means engagement, I'm afraid. And that's where we are. So if we want to suggest that the sun has set on the west, then do remember that it is one camp we will continue to deal with, while perhaps being more comfortable with the other. I think that's all right. There is no need to make zero-sum choices. Interdependence is a way forward. However, I mean, there you see Russia and China both engaging with countries like India with different levels of complexity. You see Russia selling a whole load of arms, which is complicating their relationship with the United States. Delhi's relationship with the United States is complicated by buying weapons from Moscow. There's a sanctions regime in place about that. So it's not uncomplicated, but India is pursuing its ambition of unapologetic self-interest. That is one model. It is dealing with every bloc. It has the economic power and the heft to do so. So it continues to do that. And it deals with multipolarity in ways that are new, that maximize self-interest. And we have, it may be losing stature as a democracy. It's losing points every day as a democracy. But so is the United States. I'm not sure that they particularly care. So I think this is one of the complexities we need to factor in. There are many countries, less and less so, in the Southeast Asian region. Take Malaysia, which is navigating a narrative with the West that is very independent, very sovereign, but is also trying to contain the footprint of other global camps. So there are countries with economic strength, mid-level, that are trying to navigate this great power competition and not be caught in the crosshair of very big elephants stampeding over them. Then you see India also operating in quietly in what we call minilaterals in the Middle East, by Israel and the UAE. It is very active there. The United States has made that new quad there. And you see new formations that seem like emerging threats to the architecture of the Middle East as well, where Pakistan has, of course, and continues to be a player. So I think what we need to do is take cognizance of this patchwork of alliances, continue with our own, walk away from making emotional decisions, focus on the rational, and the rational will guide you as maximum self-interest. Second is invest in your region. I think that is very difficult for Pakistan. That's always a given, that is the gold standard of eco-diplomacy. You start with the region and you spoke out. Okay, so we are doing well with CPEC and trying to take it west. We are doing well in the Central Asian region, but it has its limits. And we will have to secure at least some of the terrain of pipeline diplomacy, which will go through Afghanistan. If it is not secure, if it is not peaceful, then that's the end of all of your lanes that go through, and energy diplomacy is something we desperately need. So the US is going to incidentally intensify, and I'm sure Ambassador Olson will contest this, so will everybody. These are formulations, is likely to intensify its search for partnerships in an effort to build influence as opposed to just power. So power it is already pursuing, it has it. It is the status quo power, and it is holding on to it. But it is seeking partners to build influence in the Southeast Asia region, which is the new playground. And their perception in this competition is, the American perception is, that China will win the influence battle on balance. On balance, US military power will not be the final arbiter for countries hedging their options in the Asia-Pacific. It will be China's economic incentives. If it won't, then most of the think tanks, particularly RAND Corporation, believes that regional countries will not side with the US if forced to make a choice. You also saw India. It is still buying arms from Moscow while the US sanctions come into play for it. So no one wants to be forced to make choices here. That offers openings and opportunities. It leaves doors open for smaller countries with lower threat postures in the Pacific region. Work with incentives, build common purpose, in intensified eco-diplomacy with the Eurasian and Central Asian powers, and the landmass, of course. You can't ignore the landmass, which China is invested in. And a look at the opening with Afghanistan with fresh eyes. We need to be turbocharging pipeline projects and securing funds for completion. But the point right now is the world is looking at it very askance. There's a humanitarian disaster unfolding there, which is potentially very destabilizing. So we've got problems on either side, and avoid triumphalism at the outcome in Afghanistan. Avoid triumphalism. Very few wars are won anymore. They're just victims very often. And in doing so, when you're spokesmaning for the Taliban, spokesman for Afghanistan, we need to stabilize Afghanistan, not just one regime. We seek no friends that are only one side. We seek all as friends in Afghanistan, and that needs to be our refrain. That will play out better with the international community, which is looking for ways, including the EU, looking for ways to assist Afghanistan or the Taliban regime, but don't want to embrace the Taliban regime because they have not recognized it. So the way to leverage this is you are helping Afghanistan. The people of Afghanistan are still suffering. 97% of them will be facing, according to all the UN agencies, who, by the way, have been spectacular in trying to leverage help and assistance in Afghanistan. And they will be facing starvation and poverty. The children dying in Kabul are not fake news. They are actually dying of starvation. And Boss Jilani is showing me his watch, which you can give to me. I like that watch. So that's it. I mean, I don't want to spend time on defense and trade activities and Air Force exercises. You know how to do that. The Aman kind of peace exercises, piracy, etc. They're very good for building a confidence. And I think that's what we need to do. Power projections between land and ocean powers will make the region more volatile. If once the AUKUS project comes through with the 66 billion ability to litter the area with nukes, and a new arms race will obviously develop. So what do you do at this time? Hedge against vulnerability, grow your capacity for 21st century statecraft, which Pakistan doesn't have. Public diplomacy is the new normal, but we don't have it. We shy away from public diplomacy. We are still working not with 20th century norms. And Jilani Sarji, aap mujhse disagree karenge, but we need to move forward on that. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry I took so much time. Lastly, I want to say, please use climate talks as a path to forge regional ties. because it is not just states that will bind people together, it will be the people of states that will effect change where a nation state or a government cannot. This is a given over history, and this is something that we need to look at as a hedge against vulnerability. Be a connector, not a disruptor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Senator Sherry Rehman, for your very insightful remarks. You rightly highlighted various meta trends that are going to change the future significantly, especially hostilities and the opportunities, as you rightly mentioned. And that is why it is important not to analyze the future trends or not to analyze the future from the prism of the Cold War. With that, I would like to invite Ambassador Richard Olson, who is joining us from Washington, D.C. via Zoom link. Ambassador Olson is currently serving as the Senior Advisor at the United States Institute of Peace. Ambassador Olson has held various key positions during his diplomatic career. From 2012 to 2015, he was the U.S. Ambassador to Pakistan. He has also served as the Coordinating Director for Development and Economic Affairs at the U.S. Embassy, Kabul, Afghanistan, and U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan. Ambassador Olson, thank you for joining us this early morning in DC, and you have served at the region at crucial periods and continue to have a keen observation on the regional developments. So kindly share your perspective on the emerging situation in the region, implication of US Indo-Pacific shift, and most importantly, what in your view are the risks and opportunities for Pakistan in this regard? Over to you, Excellency.
Thank you very much, Sitara, for the warm welcome, and good afternoon, and salam alaikum to everyone in Islamabad. Thanks very much to CAS for asking me to participate in this distinguished panel with a number of my former friends and colleagues. So I think my job here today is to give the view from Washington and a little bit of context on Indo-Pacific strategy. And so let me start by describing what I see as some of the context in Washington, the political context. There's a growing and strengthening bipartisan consensus in Washington that the principal foreign policy challenge of our time is the rise of China. And it's sharpened by the perception that China is pursuing policies that are, at least in part, inimical to our interests. The primary theater for this competition is the Indo-Pacific region, and one of the responses, but only one of them, is the Indo-Pacific Strategy. Competition with China, I would say, is emerging as the framing device for US foreign policy. In that regard, it's replacing the role that counterterrorism had after 9/11. Countering terrorism will continue to be important, but it's unlikely to shape US policy in the way that it has for the last 2 decades. I want to emphasize this is not a sudden shift. There are various elements of the broad shift to the Indo-Pacific that have been building for some time. Building a strategic partnership with India was something that started with the Bush administration and the nuclear agreement. It has strong bipartisan support and has been carried out by administrations consistently since that time. The Obama administration attempted, and probably not very successfully, to implement what was first called a pivot toward East Asia and later defined as a rebalancing toward East Asia. But of course, the distractions of the ongoing confrontation with terrorism and various conflicts in the Middle East prevented a full rebalancing. And then under the Trump administration, we had the doctrine of great power competition, which also included competition with Russia, and in some instances, people even included Iran, although that strikes me as taking Iranian self-assessment at face value. The Biden administration has now taken these various strands and shaped it into an analytical construct called strategic competition. My interpretation would be that the shift from great power competition to strategic competition is that the latter is much more about the central challenge of China. And that this is the framework in which policy is going to be developed and implemented. But it's important to note that the Biden administration says, with regard to China, that it will cooperate where it can and compete where it must. In other words, the administration seeks to portray China, not to paint China as entirely an adversary, but rather as a great power with whom we have a relationship that runs the full spectrum from cooperation to competition. And I would cite as some examples of potential cooperation, first and foremost, climate change, which was central to Senator Rehman's presentation, I agree with. Dealing with COVID and future pandemics, it's another area of potential cooperation. Some of us would argue that there might be scope for cooperation regarding Afghanistan. I don't think that's developed yet, but it's something that is potential. And I take Air Marshal Khan's point that global cooperation on the question of alleviating poverty and dealing with the global issues is certainly called for. The recent conversation between President Biden and President Xi is a demonstration of how the U.S. sees the full spectrum of the relationship with China. President Biden was at pains to show respect for President Xi. As Sherry mentioned, he talked about guardrails on potentially dangerous areas of competition, provided a reassurance that our Taiwan policy, in fact, had not changed despite considerable noise in Washington. And in general, I think it was a successful attempt at a general improvement in the tone of the relationship between Beijing and Washington, if perhaps not yet the substance. Another area of possible cooperation that came up in the Biden-Xi phone call or video call was concerns about strategic stability. China has been reluctant to engage in arms controls discussions per se, but seems to find the broader concept of strategic stability acceptable, and I think that's an important development and potentially an area for for Sino-US cooperation. So, what is the nature of the strategic competition? First and foremost, and this is something I would really emphasize and where I think I'm going to disagree with much of the panel, it is economic. And this is not just me speaking. This is the view of Kurt Campbell, who is the architect of, was the architect of the pivot during the Obama administration and is now the lead person on Indo-Pacific region for the US government in the White House. And if I can plug my home institution, he spoke at USIP on Friday, and I think his remarks on Indo-Pacific and his remarks are worth listening to. The first and foremost, the challenge for the United States in dealing with China is economic. It is not military. And this is somewhat uncharted territory for the United States. The United States has had the largest economy in the world since at least 1890, which means that all of our previous competitions with great powers, initially Britain, later Germany, subsequently the Soviet Union, were all done with the position of the US being the largest economic power in the world. As has already been noted, by 2030, China is likely to overtake the United States as the largest economy in the world. And by some measures, it already has. This has a number of implications. The most important is it means that the US has a degree of dependence on China that has not been the case with competitors in the past. Some economic decoupling is already taking place, but the United States, like the rest of the world, remains somewhat dependent on Chinese manufacturing prowess and trade. This alone means that we are unlikely to be involved in a new Cold War with China. And I agree with Senator Rehman on that. There is some loose talk about this in the United States and Washington and the think tank community, but it is not U.S. policy to pursue a Cold War with China. And it means that despite Chinese fears, we do not believe that a policy of containment would be effective. And as far as I know, there is no U.S. government document with any official status calling for the containment of China. Containment, of course, was indeed the explicit policy of the United States in the confrontation with the Soviet Union. The second implication of the economic rise of China is that the U.S. needs to get its own economic house in order. This means investment in domestic infrastructure, which has just happened with the big infrastructure bill in Congress passage, and greater support for emerging technologies, specifically fifth generation telecoms, 5G, quantum computing, and artificial intelligence. These are likely to be the core sectors of competition between China and the United States, and indeed between China and the rest of the industrialized world. The third implication is that the economic dimension will shape our foreign policy response. And first and foremost, this means that the US will need to address the economic priorities of the Indo-Pacific region, including the development of infrastructure and trade relations. On infrastructure, the US is not going to compete directly with the Belt and Road Initiative because we will be doing it according to our own strengths, which we believe is private sector investment, as envisioned in B3W out of the G Summit, which builds on some earlier American initiatives, including the Blue Dot Network and the institution under the Trump administration, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. These initiatives seek to address infrastructure needs, and I would argue that this is also where the Quad is headed. The recent summit that took place in Washington was focused primarily on vaccines, B3W, and other soft power initiatives that I think are quite important for the region. Now, I will admit that trade policy is frankly a weak spot for the United States. The U.S. Special Trade Representative and Ambassador Catherine Tai has also admitted it. The fact that the Trump administration dropped out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership and China is seeking to enter its successor, the CPTPP, presents a real challenge, which the United States, I think, needs to address if it is to maintain any kind of leadership on these issues. That's the economic dimension, and although it is the topic of the conference, I would say that the competition between the U.S. and China is only secondarily about the military and security dimension. It has received more attention, but this is not the Cold War, at least not yet. Again, we need to differentiate how this is different. This competition is different from the Cold War. The confrontation between the Soviet Union and the U.S. grew out of a perception in the West that the Soviet Union was using its military might to advance a political and security agenda. The perception now is more that China is using its economic might to advance a political and perhaps security agenda. So while some may be talking about a new Cold War, and China is pursuing, and China fears that the U.S. is pursuing a policy of containment, that is not in fact U.S. policy. From the U.S. perspective, the security dimension is primarily defensive. Air Marshal Khan referred to a U.S. buildup in the Pacific. From the view from Washington is very different indeed. The buildup, it seems to us, is almost entirely on the Chinese side. In the last 10 years, the Chinese built the largest navy in the world. They are currently developing destabilizing hypersonic missile technologies and have vastly expanded their nuclear arsenal. By comparison, U.S. reinforcements of its position as an Asian power, which it has been since the middle of the 19th century, have been modest. From the U.S. perspective, the security dimension is primarily defensive. It's about preserving the operating system, again, Kurt Campbell's words, that has allowed the world, and East Asia in particular, to have a prolonged period of international stability and growing economic prosperity. There are a lot of elements, but I would include from the U.S. perspective a lot of elements of what the operating system is, relatively free trade within established frameworks, territorial integrity of states, and freedom of navigation. I'm sure there are other elements, and I'm not trying to be comprehensive. It's important to note that the U.S. does not see this element of competition as involving carving the world into blocks, as happened during the Cold War. Given the fundamentally economic nature of the cooperation, of the competition, the U.S. realizes that to ask countries to choose between the U.S. and China is not realistic. We also realize that we might not like the answer. We plan to work with various partners on an ad hoc basis to advance mutual interests. That said, I think there will eventually be strategic choices that will be made that have to be made by potential partners. My own feeling is probably the digital divide over 5G may emerge as one of them. However, speaking personally, I do worry that even though it is not the intention of the U.S. to divide Asia or the world, the workings of history may bring it about. That is, in fact, my primary worry about the state of Asia in the decades ahead. My sincere hope is that we can maintain cross-cutting relationships throughout the Indo-Pacific region and not adopt a zero-sum mentality. So let me conclude by just a couple thoughts on what this means for Pakistan, which I was asked to address. First, to the best of my knowledge, there is no U.S. government articulation of how or whether Pakistan fits into U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. Partially, this is a result of bureaucratic considerations. Pakistan falls within the Central Command area of responsibility in U.S. military's division of the world, not in the Indo-Pacific Command, so it hasn't really been addressed, at least in Department of Defense documents. But more importantly, U.S. thinking on Pakistan, and I agree again with Ambassador Rehman, has been dominated for the past 2 decades by counterterrorism and specifically by Afghanistan. And I think this is likely to be the case in the near future for 3 operational reasons. We are preoccupied still with the evacuation of people from Afghanistan, with the looming humanitarian crisis, and the over-the-horizon counterterrorism capabilities. All of these are important and indeed urgent, but probably not ultimately strategic. Given that the strategic competition between the U.S. and China is primarily economic, Pakistan can be a partner for the U.S., but I think that mostly depends on Pakistan. Frankly, speaking as a friend, I would say that like the U.S., Pakistan needs to get its economic house in order. In many ways, the market fundamentals are good, large and growing population, a youth bulge, a substantial middle class, pockets of excellence in IT and other parts of the economy. But at a macro level, Pakistan is still not as competitive a venue for investment as, for example, Southeast Asia. So what all of this suggests to me is that the policy of geoeconomics, which was announced earlier this year, is probably the most appropriate response from Pakistan's perspective to the geostrategic shift. I think undertaking the reforms necessary to make Pakistan truly competitive in the global arena is the most productive way to address the question of the U.S. and perhaps global shift towards the Indo-Pacific. So why don't I stop there? Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Olson, for this comprehensive overview of the situation and the challenges that we confront. We would request you to stay with us till the end of the discussion, and especially for the question and answer session, so that audience have a chance to take part in the discussion. We move to our next speaker, and we are very privileged to have amongst us Admiral Asif Sandila to look at the security implications of this emerging regional dynamics. Admiral Sandila served as the 19th Chief of the Naval Staff from 2011 to 2014, and throughout his naval career, Admiral Sandila has held challenging naval command and staff appointments. He is recipient of various prestigious national and international awards. Sir, kindly come on to the podium for your remarks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Air Marshal Farhat Hussain, President of CAS, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. I thank organizers for giving me this opportunity to come here and talk to you all on the emerging dynamics of Indo-Pacific Oceans. A good thing about coming to such talks is that the moderator or the person who introduces you talks good things about you and forget about your weaknesses, and they really pump you up before you come on to the dais. Thank you. While preparing for this talk, I have consulted various research papers, articles, and a book, Has China Won, by Mr. Mahbubani, a Singapore diplomat. And I thank National Institute of Maritime Affairs who were able to provide me so much information on this. And first of all, I shall very briefly talk about the term Indo-Pacific. And this terminology was first used by the Japanese Prime Minister at the Indian Parliament in 2007. And this was followed by the Indian Prime Minister when he visited Japan in 2013. And it was first officially used in the Australian Defence White Paper, which came out in 2013, and it identified emergence of the Indo-Pacific as a single strategic arc. And various writers, thinkers have hold various views on this, while one of the Australian professors, Professor Manjeet Pardesi, and he says, while the term Indo-Pacific may be a new one, this region has constituted a single strategic system for the past 2 centuries, except for the last 3 decades of the Cold War. And against this, there is another Australian professor, Pan, who says, Indo-Pacific is not a natural geographic space, but has been created artificially as a hedge against rising China. So people have different views on these things. And it is said that the Indo-Pacific idea is emphatically naval rather than continental, talking more of the naval powers. And some hold the view that US must treat India as a continental partner rather than a maritime partner. And we all know that US is the only country, naval power, capable of operating, roaming around in the Western Pacific and the Indian Oceans at will. And China is a growing naval force in the South and East China Seas, and it has so far limited power in the Malacca Strait and in the Indian Ocean. By the way, China, being a continental power always, has had its first overseas facility established in 2017 at the Horn of Africa in Djibouti, where incidentally the Americans are there, the French are there, and now the Chinese are there as well. And India is considered to be a growing naval power in the Indian Ocean and the Malacca Straits, but with limited capacity and capability in the South China Sea, which actually perhaps US is looking for in that area more. Now, a few words about the economy, trade, and demography of this region. Around 48% of the world population is within this region, and the main centers of population being China, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. It is considered that middle class is the driver of economy everywhere. And in 2020, China and USA middle class of the two countries is around 12 to 13%, and it is perceived or expected that the Chinese middle class will rise to something like 23% in 25 years, whereas USA middle class would decline to maybe less than 10%. And economies will grow where people have the means, the capacity to spend money and to make various things happen with money that they have. In this region, it has 3 out of the 4 major maritime clusters, that is Singapore, UAE, and China at the moment, the 4th one being London. And it has 4 out of the 7 choke points at sea which are established. And the ship owning by countries, there are main ship owners in this region are China and Japan. And ship construction is again China, Japan, and South Korea. And interestingly, the ship breaking is also in this region, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India. It is also known that the energy reserves play a very important role, and it is estimated that around 70% of the oil and about 50% of the gas is within this region. And the world is heavily dependent on these energy resources in terms of container and general cargo going and coming to this region. A few words about the geopolitics. This region, unfortunately, has several conflict zones like Palestine, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Kashmir, Yemen, and add to this South China Sea, which perhaps is now becoming more of a flashpoint than rest of the places. And 4 out of the 7 nuclear powers are around this region. And major stakeholders, in addition to the regional countries, here are China, India, and the USA. Now a few words about the Belt and Road Initiative vis-a-vis Indo-Pacific Partnership. Chinese-led BRI contains inherent strengths not shared by the corresponding Indo-Pacific Partnership. And BRI is an inclusive project based on economic connectivity and cooperation among about 60 countries in the whole world, not necessarily only in this region. So it has more to do with the economy and welfare of the mankind. BRI has already several projects which are operational. I would like to mention a few. The natural gas pipeline between Myanmar and south of China is already operational, which started working in 2013. This rail link from China up to Europe, certain portions have already become operational. And CPAC, which is flagship program of BRI, is progressing fairly satisfactorily, I would say. And there are plans to connect Xinjiang with Gwadar by rail. And BRI is already spreading its economic benefits to almost all over the world. On the other hand, strategies put forward by Indo-Pacific Partnership, that is, you may call it Quad or whatever, the camp under USA, are mainly defined by security-related concerns, thus fail to naturally fit into the existing politico-economic system of the region and Asia in particular. And China is also establishing new international forums and organizations in line with its own Sino-centric concepts of order, and especially in this region. And it is noted by many that Washington's destructive anti-WTO policies, withdrawal from several international organizations and agreements has enhanced Beijing's role in the world already at the global level. And it is also opined that for US strategic rivalry with China may have edged out war on terror that has been talk of the day since 2001. Now, a few words about the Chinese perspective. China's gain in economic and political importance is taken by the Chinese thinkers and leaders is nothing more than the resurgence of China. And the Chinese leadership speaks of China as world's largest developing country. So they are very, I would say, humble, and it shows humility from the leadership. And political leadership considers that stability of China depends on the maritime trade that needs to be secured by an expanded and powerful navy, and that is what China is doing slowly and gradually. Some people also say that fate of Soviet Union may have taught the Chinese leadership, and one thing that they follow at the moment, and we see their restraint and their reactions, is open competition or confrontation with USA should be avoided as long as it's possible. So it is more of thinking about themselves and everybody else, not only you and me, but everybody. And they also feel that the events in Hong Kong and sometimes even in Taiwan, they are supported and funded by the US and its Western allies, which perhaps is not wrong either. It is also perceived that US is seeking to weaken Chinese system and unilaterally achieve regime change in Beijing. Now this word regime change, I would like to mention a book here. The title is, I think it came in 2020 or 18, Losing the Long Game, the False Promise of Regime Change in the Middle East by Mr. Philip Gordon, who is presently special assistant to the US president. I would not say much, but I think the very title of this book says it all. The regime change experience for USA has not shown much promise in the last 20 plus years. And very briefly, some salient points from the US-China competition for the region is Indo-Pacific region and its maritime zones have gained more strategic importance, and importance of sea lines of communication in the region will continue to rise for China, Japan, and India and other countries also. And maritime claims in the South China Sea remain international flashpoints, especially with the different claims that the different countries have and the way China, USA is involved these days. Very interesting I found during this study was that USA remained neutral at various naval skirmishes that took place in this area between China and South Vietnam, which was ally of America, but since 2000 onward, it has now come up openly against China. And US Indo-Pacific strategy entails enhanced role for the regional players like Australia, India, and Japan. And few words about Pakistan. Pakistan Navy is a regional power, and it has trained large number of regional navies and enjoys still quite good influence there. And US Indo partnership would have implications for Pakistan. I'm sure Ambassador Jilani is going to talk more about this. And change in US position in Kashmir to appease India could be fairly problematic for Pakistan if that were to happen. And Pakistan's relations with China and success of CPEC is being considered as an encirclement of India and not looking at the broader good that it is going to bring to the region or to the countries involved. And this could invite political, diplomatic, or military and asymmetric challenges from India. And I would like to specially mention here about the Aman exercise that takes place every 2 years under the Pakistan Navy. It started 2007 and it takes place every 2 years. It started with participation of 25 countries, and this year in 2001 there were 45 of them, and they came from all over the world, China, Russia, America, and of course Europe and the regional countries. And it can be termed as a major diplomatic engagement which has, in my view, enhanced Pakistan's image in the world and in particular in the region. And motto of this exercise is Together for Peace. In the end, I would like to say that the Indo-Pacific region will gain more importance in the future as US has made a policy shift, various terminologies being used from Atlantic, Europe to Asia Pacific pivot, etc., etc. And China definitely seems to be making progress with its policies of economic connectivity with over 60 countries in the world. And I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Admiral Sandila, for a very comprehensive overview of the situation in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean and the emerging challenges not only in the naval domain but the overall military or the security situation of the region. That brings us to the next topic, and in my view, one of the most crucial fronts in this challenging environment is the diplomatic front. Pakistan's astute diplomacy over the years at various challenging situations in history has helped the country to stay on the course. To discuss what are the diplomatic challenges and the options for Pakistan in the evolving situation and the challenging situation that we see confronting us in future, what are the options and the choices Pakistan has in front of it? To discuss that, we have Ambassador Jalil Abbas Jilani with us today. And Ambassador Jilani is currently the Director of Foreign Policy at CAS, As a career diplomat, he has 38 years of experience at bilateral and multilateral experience positions. He has served as Pakistan's ambassador to the United States, Belgium, Luxembourg, European Union, Australia. And Ambassador Jilani has also served as the Foreign Secretary of Pakistan. Ambassador Jilani, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be sharing this panel with some of the best minds that we have, including Ambassador Olson, with whom I have worked very, very closely as Foreign Secretary and also subsequently as Ambassador of Pakistan to the United States of America. It is always a pleasure listening to him, his balanced and correct views on most of the issues that we have been discussing in the past. Let me at the outset make it clear that the remarks or the observations that I'm going to make are based on the widespread perception that exists in Pakistan at every level. These remarks are also based on my conversation with other regional colleagues, the academics from other regions, as well as my colleagues, diplomatic colleagues from other regions in various. We all discuss the ongoing China-US competition and rivalry. And this is certainly one of those developments which is considered as one of the most significant challenge that is faced either by Pakistan or many other countries in this region. This rivalry is certainly going to dominate the global landscape for a long time because of the ideological, economic, security, and political factors. It is likely to sustain for a long time. The impact of this rivalry is going to be more pronounced in Asia Pacific and South Asia. And this is something that we are already witnessing. What are the contours of this rivalry? There is mounting tension in Asia following the announcement of Asia Pacific Strategy, initially by President Obama, renamed as Indo-Pacific Strategy subsequently. The Chinese claim on South and East China is being challenged by a number of countries, including those in the periphery of China. The Chinese economic and military development which is taking place is also generating a lot of nervousness in the United States of America and also in some of the Asian countries. Chinese investments in Pakistan, whether it is in the shape of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor or investments in other South Asian countries like Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, etc., that is also creating some kind of a discomfort in not only in India, but also it should be a concern for the United States of America, because these South Asian countries have begun to kind of challenge the Indian hegemony that we have witnessed for quite some time. West Asia is likely to emerge yet another theater of competition. China has announced $400 billion of investments in Iran, which certainly would not be seen kindly by a number of countries. And plus, China would also like to extend China-Pakistan economic corridor to Afghanistan and perhaps beyond. Quad has been reactivated. The physical summit of Quad recently took place. Quad certainly has had the twin objectives of first sustaining the Asian order and also to contain China. And these twin objectives are now being pursued with greater vigor in the last couple of months or years. And then, ladies and gentlemen, we also see the emergence of yet another alliance in the shape of AUKUS. Quad didn't have any military dimension, but AUKUS is a security alliance involving Australia, UK, and the United States of America. And under AUKUS, sensitive technology is going to be shared with Australia on nuclear submarines, and the widespread perception is that this technology is meant to deter China. In yet another development, US, India, Israel, and UAE have also established a new grouping, which is also being referred to as a Middle East the Quad by a number of international academics and international media. In view of these developments, what are Pakistan's challenges? I think the list is very, very exhaustive. Some of the challenges that I am going to mention, they may be perceptional challenges, but most of them, they are also based on some realities that we are. For instance, US-China rivalry, there is a widespread perception in Pakistan would pose a serious challenge to Pakistan's economic and security dimension. The rivalry also poses challenge to sustaining economic cooperation with China while retaining US and Western goodwill. There is also risks to South Asian stability because of this rivalry, increased possibility of conflict, nuclear arms race, and also adverse impact on Afghanistan stability is something which is also linked to the US-China rivalry by many of the observers. Maintaining a balance between the two power centers will again pose a huge challenge for most Asian countries. No country would like the relation to reach a point whereby they have to make the difficult choice of with us or them. And I'm heartened to hear Ambassador Olson that US has absolutely no desire to establish new blocs. Ladies and gentlemen, increased US-India strategic cooperation poses the most significant challenge to Pakistan. This challenge has been further compounded by defense, logistic and intelligence agreements which have been signed, which Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan also referred to in his remarks. And I am referring to the agreements like CASA, Communication Compatibility and Security Agreement. I am referring to LEMWA and BECA, etc. According to a large number of security analysts from within Pakistan, from India and elsewhere, they feel and they assess this development as extremely destabilizing. Destabilizing in the sense that in case of a future war between Pakistan and India, or for that matter, a war between India and China, because of these agreements, US will act as a silent partner of India. India has certainly benefited the most from this US-China rivalry. Besides, it has gained significant influence at the policy-making level in the United States of America. It has gained military agreements. It has become the third largest recipient of arms and ammunition. And also it is also benefited in the realm of nuclear mainstreaming, you know, in the economic domain also. And then India has, because of this, because India was declared as the pivot of the US Indo-Pacific Strategy, it again exploited this position by violating many of the US laws, the sanction laws. And I am referring to the acquisition of S-400 anti-missile defense system. In the American Congress, a bill has already been moved to exempt India from the sanction law. And previously, India has also been violating, in the sense that violating the Iran sanction law, and it has been purchasing Iranian oil without any difficulty because it enjoyed a certain immunity. India has also become more belligerent in this region. There is a very strong perception in Pakistan as well as in many countries that because of the growing US-India partnership and US-China rivalry, because US and India, they share the same, since they have the same convergences as far as China is concerned. So it is becoming more belligerent vis-a-vis Pakistan and other countries. Balakot airstrikes, for instance, many feel that it was triggered by some of the statements which were issued by senior officials in the US administration, talking about India's right to self-defense, because of which India was encouraged to undertake those strikes. Similarly, its action on 5th August 2019 in respect of Kashmir is also seen in the context of this rivalry and the newfound confidence that India began to acquire after developing a close partnership, because it felt that it would, any action that it takes would be condoned by the major powers. US also actively lobbied for India to become a member of the nuclear supplier group while opposing Pakistan's membership. Since weapons of mass destruction have also been included in the mandate of Financial Action Task Force recently, there is also a fear that in case Pakistan is able to fulfill all the conditionalities which have been imposed by FATF, at some later stage, a pressure can be built on this particular, because of this particular development. And then uncertainty which has been caused by US-China economic rivalry, it adds to Pakistan's economic woes. economic situation remains precarious in Pakistan. The GDP growth has further worsened because of the COVID pandemic, and then placement of Pakistan in the Financial Action Task Force places Pakistan in a difficult situation and adds to its economic difficulties. One very important development that I have witnessed in the last at least 2 years is that because of the Indo-US campaign against China-Pakistan economic corridor, that has given birth to lobbies within the country also, within Pakistan also. There are certain lobbies who have joined this campaign against China-Pakistan economic corridor. What are the options for Pakistan? I think the Pakistan's close relationship with China, which are historic relationship. Previously, they were confined to military and strategic cooperation. A new dimension was added in the last 1 decade, and that is in the area of economic cooperation, whereby Pakistan became the kind of a flagship country for the advancement of Belt and Road Initiative by China. CPEC certainly has the potential to transform Pakistan economically. I was very closely involved with the negotiations of China-Pakistan economic corridor, and I feel I take a lot of pride that I signed the China-Pakistan economic corridor agreement on 23rd May 2013 with the Chinese foreign minister in Islamabad, and I have absolutely no doubt that it has great potentials to transform Pakistan, provided we stick to the parameters within which CPEC was negotiated and within the kind of same parameters. I think Pakistan has absolutely no option but to maintain this trajectory. Secondly, I think there are some perceptional issues that I talked about in the beginning of my talk. I think the same needs to be addressed in a structured, high-level dialogue between Pakistan and the United States of America, or for that matter, between Pakistan, the United States of America, and China. These are important issues that, because in our discussion when we talk about the downturn in Pakistan-US relationship, a number of factors are mentioned as the factors. There is a China factor, there is an India factor, there is an Afghan factor, and there is also the issues related to trust deficit which has developed over the last several years. And I think in order to address all these concerns and in order to develop a mutually beneficial relationship, it is extremely important that we enter into some kind of a structured dialogue, which is missing at the moment. And then China, Pakistan, and the United States have a trilateral dialogue to address and allay each other's concerns or respective concerns is again something which is of paramount importance. Broadening trade and investment relations is certainly extremely important because it would widen Pakistan's options when it comes to US-Pakistan relations, or for that matter, Pakistan-China relations. For this purpose, I think it is extremely important that we create a conducive atmosphere for the US investors to invest in Pakistan. The current phase whereby we are developing industrial zones along the length and breadth of China-Pakistan economic corridor, it provides several opportunities to US investors to invest in those industrial zones. It also provides opportunities to European investors, the Middle Eastern investors, and that is something that is going to create a win-win situation for everybody. If there is any expectation from any quarters that Pakistan will either opt out of China-Pakistan economic corridor or it would distance itself from China, would be entirely misplaced. There is an across-the-board consensus amongst all the political parties in Pakistan, amongst all the civil society, that we need to maintain this close economic and strategic relationship with China. And in this context, it is extremely important that the US avoid viewing its relationship with Pakistan either through the lens of China or the lens of India or the lens of Afghanistan. I think this is something which has been happening in the past, but in order to, and as Ambassador Olson has rightly mentioned, that this is a relationship which is extremely important for both the countries. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. We have both benefited from this relationship, so this positive trajectory will have to be maintained. Pakistan's relationship with China is as old as Pakistan's relationship with the United States of America. We have never played one against the other. As a matter of fact, we have always played the role of a bridge between China and the United States of America, and we need to reassure our American friends that Pakistan will continue to maintain this positive role that it has played in the past. And lastly, ladies and gentlemen, I'll mention that if Pakistan is looked at through the lens of other countries, it would certainly add stress in our bilateral relations. Alienating Pakistan will certainly worsen the strategic stability in South Asia. It will trigger an arms race. It will also trigger regional conflicts. And it would also be counterproductive to our common goals that we have with the United States of America to stabilize this region as well as Afghanistan. And again, in the context of Afghanistan, the kind of convergences that we have, we share the US objectives in Afghanistan that there has to be an inclusive government. The women's rights should be protected, and Afghanistan should be rid of extremist and terrorist international outfits. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador Jilani, for highlighting some of the perceived as well as the actual challenges and risks that Pakistan faces and must address through diplomacy to ensure a mutually beneficial outcome. Ladies and gentlemen, so far we have heard views on political, security, and diplomatic dimensions of this debate, and we could not have a better person than Ambassador Inam al-Haq for the concluding remarks for this intense debate. Ambassador Inam al-Haq is a career diplomat who has served as Foreign Secretary as well as the Foreign Minister of Pakistan. He also served as Pakistan's ambassador to Turkey, China, and remained the permanent representative to the United Nations as well. Ambassador Inam is the Chairman Board of Governance of the Islamabad Policy Research Institute and also held the position of Chairman of Pakistan-China Friendship Forum. Ambassador Inam, kindly come over to the podium and share your insights on this topic that we have in front of us.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Distinguished participants in the seminar. The subject of the seminar itself was very comprehensive, and we have been privileged to hear discourses by Senator Sherry Rahman, Ambassador Rick Olson, Admiral Sandila, former CNS, and Ambassador Jalil Abbas Jilani, former Foreign Secretary. And we are all grateful to them for the very comprehensive inputs into the subject. It would have been extremely difficult to summarize what they have said, but to add to this problem, Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan sprung a surprise on us and handed us at the last minute a list of 6 questions to be addressed as well. This is like a test paper, and I would say that all of these questions actually require a full seminar to be fully addressed. But at the end of my concluding remarks, I will give brief answers in terms of yes and no with a few additional words to these questions. At the end of such a comprehensive discussion, it would be appropriate to arrive at some conclusions derived from the conversations of today by our experienced, well-informed, and highly placed speakers with very high intellect. But let us recap the situation briefly. The Asia-Pacific pivot was formally launched in 2011 under Obama administration by the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. It has evolved over the decade to become the Indo-Pacific Strategy. This strategy has bipartisan support in the United States. And since his assumption of office earlier this year, President Biden has been assiduously building up alliances in support of this strategy and the containment of China policy. These alliances, in fact, symbolize the pervasive and multidimensional policies of the United States and the West to maintain their domination of the world, both in geopolitical, geoeconomic, and geostrategic terms. These have been discussed by the speakers. They include the Quad, the AUKUS, and recently the roping in of NATO into the Indo-Pacific through the new NATO doctrine adopted by the defense ministers of NATO and to be approved next summer by the summit of NATO countries. A new Quad for the Middle East has been established, and then there is, on 9th and 10th of December, the virtual summit of democracies under the auspices of the United States and to be chaired by President Biden. As a brief aside, I may mention that according to a leaked list of invitees in the United States, Pakistan has also been invited to this summit, although our government has not so far issued any statement confirming the invitation. Russia and China are obviously unfavorably disposed towards this summit because, number one, they are not among the invitees, and number two, they see that the summit is aimed against them. This is evidenced by the themes of the summit. There are 3 themes. And the first theme is to defend democracies against authoritarian regimes or authoritarianism. The secondary themes are to fight corruption and to advance respect for human rights. I'm sure that Pakistan will eventually decide to participate in this virtual summit, and I'm sure that we will try to ensure that nothing inimical to our friends emerges from this summit. In the context of the Indo-Pacific Strategy, there are a number of areas of possible confrontation between China and the United States and the West. And you are well aware of those, so I will just mention them and pass on. One, of course, is Taiwan, which is a part of One China policy, and where recently the United States had, in a way, issued an aggressive statement by saying that they would come to the defense of Taiwan if aggression was committed against it by China. The second is the South China Sea, where China has laid claims to a major part of the South China Sea. Then there is the East China Sea, the maritime lines of communication, and finally the China-India confrontation on the line of control. There are other areas where the United States exerts pressure on China on the issue of human rights, and these include Hong Kong, Tibet, and Xinjiang. China has rejected such pressures by stating that these are internal affairs of China, and no one should interfere in the internal affairs of China. In the economic field, there is the so-called trade war conducted by the United States, initiated and conducted by the United States through the imposition of anti-dumping duties, high tariffs, sanctions, efforts to decouple the two economies, creation of new supply lines, and discouraging American and Western corporations from investing in China. And finally, there is the tech war, in which the United States is arrayed against China. We all know about the G5 communications and networking controversy of Huawei. There is the issue of cyber war, outer space, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and other weaponries of different sorts, including hyperglide weapons and autonomous weapons, etc. While China is coping with all of these pressures, it is clear in its mind that the most difficult pressure it has to face is in geoeconomics. Because it is in geoeconomics, and particularly in the control of international financial system, that the United States and West have excelled since the end of the Second World War. We all know about the Bretton Woods institutions that were established at the end of the Second World War, including the World Bank, the IMF, the IFC, etc. So China is working to establish an alternative international financial structure. And this is one of the most important initiatives that China is taking, and it bears some conversation. The concrete measures already taken by China in this context include, first, establishing the RMB, renminbi, or the yuan as an international or global currency. Although the Chinese yuan is included in the IMF basket of currencies, it occupies 5th place after the dollar, the euro, the pound, and the yen. In order to compete with the World Bank and the IMF, etc., China has established the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank with a capital of $100 billion, which is already functional. It started with 57 founding members and today has 104 members. The second bank that has been established by China and 4 other countries, the countries members of BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is also headquartered in Shanghai and has an authorized capital of 100 billion. These 2 banks are primarily being used to help developing countries. Although this bank was started with 5 countries, 3 new members have been added, and it is my view that Pakistan should apply to become a full member of the bank. And in passing, I might add that Pakistan should also make an effort to become a member of the G20 because we qualify for the membership of G20 under the purchasing power parity GDP of Pakistan. Then there is the Chinese initiative of BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, which extends to more than 60 countries and will have a total value of more than $1 trillion when it is completed. And CPEC, which is the flagship of BRI, which when completed will have an investment of $62 billion from China. China has also established the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is a free trade agreement between ASEAN, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and China. You will notice the diverse membership. Members belonging to the so-called Western camp are also a part of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. India was also a part of these negotiations, but opted out at the last minute for fear of being inundated with exports from these economies which are much more developed than that of India. Then, in order to avoid the dominance of the dollar, China has entered into agreements with more than 40 countries for currency swaps. This includes Pakistan and most importantly Russia, because Russia is under US sanctions and the bilateral trade between China and Russia is now being conducted totally under currency swap agreements. And China has also applied to become the member of an economic organization which was negotiated with by the United States exclusively to keep China out of it. This is called the Comprehensive Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. And mostly it has membership of countries which are pro-American. US opted out of this on the first day of Trump presidency, and recently China has applied to become a member. There are 2 internal measures that China has taken to make its economy independent of Western dependence. One is the strategy of Made in China 2025. This plan was initiated in 2015 to reduce Chinese dependence on foreign technology and to promote Chinese manufacturers in global marketplace. And the other is the dual circulation strategy, which entails weaning the Chinese economy away from its export-oriented growth, although exports would remain a vital sector of the economy, and encouraging domestic consumption by the 400 million strong middle class of China, which has emerged and which exceeds the entire population of the United States and is without doubt the largest single market in the world. Now today, in the context of the Indo-Pacific Strategy and also in the context of US-China relationship, there are some thinkers in the United States who actually believe that the United States can win a limited war against China and are in fact suggesting that the US should prepare for a limited war. A recent book by Elbridge Colby, who was a former Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Department of Defense, it is titled The Strategy of Denial, advocates an aggressive US policy towards China, including even limited nuclear exchanges if necessary, unmindful of the fact that once a war starts, no one can predict the direction, the extent, or the outcome of a war. But the book ends in a somewhat limp manner by concluding that the role of this strategy actually is not war, but to come to peace and an acceptable détente with China through the acceptance of a distinct possibility of war with China. Now, this is a logic which escapes me, but the author has written a full book on that, and there are other similar thinkers in the United States. The US government also believes that China is preparing for conflict, because many people have written about the increasing assertiveness of China in world affairs. And in recent months, the United States has declared that China is working to quadruple its stock of nuclear warheads to 1,000, is already building silos in 4 different places to house new ICBMs, has recently tested a hypersonic glide vehicle which can be taken into orbit on the back of a rocket and then be directed at the desired target from space, thus adding a new dimension to its triad of nuclear delivery systems by adding a 4th dimension, and now it is being called a quad of delivery systems. China, according to many estimates, is already ahead of the United States in artificial intelligence and in autonomous weapon systems. The initial statements of the Biden administration when it came into power were aggressive, confrontational, and in your face. However, there seems to have been second thoughts in the United States, and it appears that while continuing to build the alliances that President Biden has started, the United States has desired to lower the temperature of the rhetoric and has decided to enter into a dialogue at the highest level. We all know about the 3.5-hour virtual summit that was recently held between President Biden and President Xi on 15th of November. There was no major breakthrough at the summit meeting, but the tone of both leaders was non-accusative and temperate, and the discussions were described by an American spokesman, Jake Sullivan, who is the National Security Advisor, as respectful, straightforward, and open. Biden stepped back on his statement on Taiwan and reiterated the one China policy of the United States, while President Xi indicated that China would exercise patience on Taiwan, but also warned that anyone who plays with fire will get burned. Biden also reminded China that China had agreed to purchase $200 billion worth of American goods in the first phase agreement signed under the Trump administration, but it had not done so, and China will look at that problem. There would be follow-up meetings of officials between the two sides, and the two leaders will be talking to each other occasionally as well. Now let's talk briefly of Pakistan-US relations. Despite our oft and openly expressed desire at the highest level to have close, cooperative, and long-term relations with the US, there has been really no reciprocal response from the United States at any level. The most recent iteration of this desire was conveyed to the special rep of the United States on Afghanistan, John West, during his call on the COAS. But there was no indication from the American side that they had reciprocated the desire of the COAS. The position of the United States vis-à-vis Pakistan is very clear. And let's clear the cobwebs in our own minds. And that was stated, unfortunately, in India by Wendy Sherman, when she said, before visiting Pakistan, that the visit has a specific and narrow purpose. There is no possibility of a broad-based engagement with Pakistan. US would be seeking facilities from Pakistan to ensure its security and the security of India, and US will brief India on its conversations with Pakistan. She concluded by saying that US relations with India are vast, deep, broad, robust, energetic, and meaningful, and that US has no partner in the world better than India. So we know the extent of American relations with India. She came to Pakistan after this announcement and, except for a few meaningless platitudes, said nothing to dispel the impact of her words in India. Do we need any further clarifications from the United States regarding its view of its relations with Pakistan? It seems that we do. Notwithstanding this clear enunciation, the NSA of Pakistan, Mr. Moeed Yusuf, on 20th of November, in an interview, declared that the United States has no Pakistan policy. I wonder what he wanted the Americans to tell us. He also stated that good relations with the United States are a compulsion for Pakistan, and that Pakistan was holding discussions with the Americans over the American demand for ALOCs over Pakistan, airlines of communication. But surprisingly, he declared that Pakistan was not asking even for one anna, ek anna bhi hum wapsi mein nahi maang rahe. If that is correct, what are these negotiations about? It is my understanding from independent sources that the United States considers an arrangement over ALOCs as the primary determinant of future Pakistan-US relations. And this bears out Wendy Sherman's views that there is no likelihood of a broad-based engagement with the United States. If Pakistan agrees to the American demand, at best we can expect a few morsels, like the continuation of IMET, some military spares perhaps, some disbursements in the social sector through the American-approved NGOs, and perhaps a nod to the IMF, which seems to have been made, to go easy on Pakistan. But simultaneously, despite Ambassador Olson's statement, it is my view that the pressure will continue on Pakistan not to break away from China, but to distance itself from China. Is that what we are willing to settle for? Let's be quite clear. Irrespective of what we may desire, and I know that many in Pakistan and in the corridors of power, and perhaps some of you sitting here honestly believe that our close economic and military relationship with the United States should be resurrected. The hard fact is that the United States has made its choice for its strategic partner in this region, and that partner is not Pakistan. We have to accept that and proceed from that fact. India, as Jalil Abbas Jilani pointed out, is enjoying the best of both worlds. The first of the 5 S-400 anti-missile batteries from Russia has been delivered already. And President Putin is expected to visit India in December, where some more defense deals may be on the anvil. And it remains to be seen whether the United States will sanction India, as it did Turkey, when Turkey made a deal for S-400s. But it would seem that an exemption might be made in case of India. The US policy vis-à-vis India is not likely to change in the near future. Our relations with the United States will not rise beyond transactional relationship. US will not support Pakistan in any of its problems with India, including the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, which is vital for us. And if Pakistan should agree to side with the United States in its dealings with China, which in my view would be against the vital national interests of Pakistan, Pakistan will be subjected to Indian overlordship in South Asia. We must know that. One can validly argue that Pakistan is dependent on financial assistance and goodwill of IMF, World Bank and Asian Development Bank, etc. The ratings by Standard & Poor, Moody's and Fitch, all controlled by the West, which determine the rates at which we can raise loans in the bond markets of the world, that the threat of FATF continues to hang over our head, and most importantly, of a very high level of trade with the West. These are all very solid arguments. But that does not mean that we should be forced to make a choice between our friends and allies. China is a next-door neighbor. It has always stood by us. We have a multifaceted relationship with China encompassing strategic, political, military, economic, and other areas. Most of our military equipment flows from China. Our Air Force, I was reading an international report, is purchasing J-10s from China to furbish its Air Force strength. China is already the largest economy in the world in purchasing power parity. It's larger by 1/6 than that of the United States economy. It will overtake the US economy in nominal dollar terms before 2030. China's military power and its soft power will continue to increase. And China most importantly, is a bulwark against Indian ambitions in this region. And those are ambitions of dominance and hegemony. Pakistan is not alone in facing this dilemma of the troubles between the United States and China. Most developing countries in Africa, Asia, and even Latin America are being subjected to similar pressures. If you will remember, there used to exist a group of countries called the non-aligned countries. Okay. I think we should think of reviving the non-aligned movement to act as a buffer between the two major powers of the world today. That group is lying dormant these days. Our message should be very clear and unambiguous. One, Pakistan will not play a zero-sum game of either or. We want friendship with all and enmity with none. The world must not be divided into opposing blocs again. Humanity cannot afford a new Cold War nor survive a nuclear holocaust. Two, our relations with China are not open for discussion. And three, Pakistan will not accept any country's hegemony in South Asia. And we will negotiate with everybody on the basis of these fundamental principles. With your permission, I will very briefly address the 6 questions. First question, will the US play a role in facilitating, encouraging resumption of dialogue? Answer is no. Short answers. They will not push India, and as long as India does not wish to enter a dialogue with Pakistan, the United States will do nothing. 2. What lessons has US learned from its experience in recent conflicts? US has learned that it is good at fighting, not good at nation building. And in future, we should begin to believe that it will not stay in other countries long. It has been burnt its fingers in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, and in other places. 3. Will US continue to rely mainly on its hard power? Yes. But it will also consider resolving global challenges of hunger, poverty, disease, and climate change to some degree. And you know that there was recently an agreement at COP26 in Glasgow between the United States and China on addressing climate change. 4. Is it possible for the world powers and allies to offer a fresh look at Asia Pacific? It is possible, but not likely in the near future. 5. Will the panel like to analyze the dichotomy between the values being practiced and promoted within India and Western liberal ideals? What Western liberal ideals? These are all words. The practices are hard policies of exploitation. India is moving to the right, the West is also moving to the right. India is promoting Hindutva, the West is also promoting radicalization within its own ranks. And we all know the divisions that have been created within the United States between the Republicans and the Democrats, and the threats to democracy in the United States itself. Last question. Can the world powers share knowledge, technology, and wealth with the developing world? No. This is their strength. This is how they exploit the developing world. Why do you think WIPO was established, the World Intellectual Property Organization? Why do you think that they say that intellectual property cannot be shared? Why do they accuse China of stealing their intellectual property? Because they believe that this gives them the strength to control the world. So they will not share their knowledge and technology and wealth. And finally, I would suggest a book. The name of the book is Upheaval. It is written by Jared Diamonds, who is an American writer. And in it, there are 2 chapters on the United States. It gives the strengths of the United States as well as the weaknesses of the United States. Please, if you have the time, read that book. I would like to conclude by thanking the Center of Aerospace and Security Studies, its President Air Marshal, retired Farhat Hussain Khan, Director of Foreign Policy, Ambassador Jilani, for organizing this seminar and inviting such a distinguished panel of speakers to address us. We have gathered and gained much from their knowledge and analysis. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Inam, for your very insightful comment and concluding and encapsulating the whole debate into your concluding remarks, as also touching upon the questions that were initially raised by the President Cass in his opening remarks. With this, we move through the last part of discussion and open the floor for the question and answer session from our worthy audience. We'll have a couple of rounds of questions. In order to save time, we'll take the question in 3 questions at a time. And kindly raise your hands, and a mic will be provided to you. I'll request you to introduce yourself and be brief so that we may add as many people as possible. So we have the mic on 2 sides, okay. So could you please take the mic to the gentleman in the middle, please?
Raza Khan, Special Correspondent, PTU World. First of all, I would like to appreciate and commend the illuminating talk of Ambassador Inam. It was badly needed that somebody put the record straight with regard to China and USA. My question is directed to Air Marshal Farhat first, and then I would like Ambassador Jalil to chip in as well. So isn't it high time, in the wake of the talk of Ambassador Inam that and the happenings of 27th February 2019, when we found out, or the general public found out, that we have conditional F-16s, conditional on the because of American pressure not to use them on the offensive operations against India, and then they were supposed to come and count them as well. Isn't it high time that we would rather go towards unconditional J-10s, J-11s, J-16s, or even the J-20s from China, rather than relying on these F-16 from the West? And the other question to Ambassador Jalil, isn't it high time that our foreign policy specialists, especially from your foreign service, stop looking at the West in some sort of a glorified manner, and this London and Washington connection? Most of them tend to favor being posted over there, and their children they send over there to study. Isn't it high time that they stop and come out of this humiliating tendency of looking towards the West and start looking at it in a more realistic manner, as Ambassador Inam has done? Your thoughts, please.
Thank you. We'll take 3 questions at a time. Yes, please, 1 in the back and 1 here. Yes, sir, please stand up.
Thank you very much. I'm Farhan Bukhari, journalist by profession. This is a question to the panel, but maybe more specifically to Admiral Sandila and Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan. The question relates to Pakistan's sliding economic conditions, especially in the past decade and a bit, and some of the reforms that we hear about from various leaders still appear no more than pipe dreams. That's one part of the reality, but the other part of the reality is our very real need for defense hardware, plans already on the table. Next year is going to be important from a naval perspective. The arrival of the 4 Chinese submarines, 2022 at least, that was the announcement. Bits of speculation on the next line of fighter planes, which may not necessarily be the J-10s, but a more advanced fighter plane. How do you reconcile these two extremes unless there is very solid, concerted internal reforms with Pakistan? Is Pakistan going to be in a position to cope with the challenges and even meet the obligations which are in the pipeline right now? Thank you.
The last question for this round, and I may also want to inform that Ambassador Olsen is also available online. If you have a question from him, he's available to answer that. Yes, please. The gentleman in the middle, please.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम, माय नेम इज़ शफकत, मैं आईआर का स्टूडेंट हूँ। मेरा सवाल एम्बेसडर जिलानी साहब से है कि इंडो पैसिफिक जो शिफ्ट है हम इंडिया के लैंड से क्यों देख रहे हैं? अगर क्यों हम पाकिस्तान को इकोनॉमिकल इतना डेवलप करके G20 का हिस्सा बन जाए, हम पाकिस्तान को सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल का जो मेंबरशिप है उनका हिस्सा बन जाए, अगर इंडिया के लेंस से देख रहे हैं तो पाकिस्तान तो इतना रेडी नहीं है उनके लिए। मैं पहली दफ़ा इंडो पैसिफिक का शिफ्ट के बारे में जो टॉपिक के बारे में बात हो रही है मैं पहली दफ़ा सुन रहा हूँ। इंडिया इतनी दुनिया की बेहतरीन टेक्नोलॉजी हासिल कर रहा है दुनिया के हर कंट्री से। इंडिया जो है 2+2 डायलॉग कर रहा है, क्वाड का हिस्सा है, तो पाकिस्तान जो 2+2 डायलॉग कर रहा है TLP के साथ कर रहा है, TTP के साथ कर रहा है, BLA के साथ कर रहा है, तो पाकिस्तान कैसे बैलेंस कर सकता है?
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. So could you please, sir, could you please start with the first question on conditional F-16 and then we turn to Ambassador Jilani and Admiral Sandila, please. Could you please bring a mic here, if that's not working? Amna, could you please bring that mic here? It's here.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The two questions for me, one from our friend from the PTV. We have conditional F-16s. Why not to go for J-10s? First of all, I'm not aware of any condition of the F-16s. If there is some, it would be government to government, some classification. But we haven't seen it as yet. I can't go into much details on this. But remember, we have a diversified Air Force or even the other services. We have a fleet of JF-17s, which is basically a Chinese origin. We only have a limited number of F-16 which are American origin. And remember, we, as the speakers have said, we do not want to disassociate ourselves from one country and rely on the other country. Why not to have both equipment, both technologies? West is known for the technological advantages that we have. So F-16 is a proven weapon system. So is the JF-17 and maybe J-10 in future. So we, the government and the Pakistan Air Force is fully aware of this reality that we need to keep a happy balance. Of course, there is a strong bondage with China, which will take us further up on this path for getting more high-tech equipment from China. So I don't think there is any serious concern on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Two very relevant questions. With regard to our PTP colleagues' question, I would say that we are not looking to please the Western countries in order to promote our foreign policy objectives or our vital strategic interests. We are aware that we do not have strategic convergences with the United States of America. But at the same time, we are also aware that retaining each other's goodwill, both for Pakistan and the United States of America, is important for the promotion and preservation of our respective interests. Since 1947, Pakistan has made a number of hard choices for the promotion of its vital interests. We were subjected to a lot of pressure to abandon UN Security Council resolution on Kashmir, but we did not. And we will never do that. Similarly, on the nuclear issue, again, you are very well aware that we were subjected to a lot of sanctions. But since we were pursuing our vital interests, we did not compromise on our vital national interest, and we will never compromise on our vital national interest in the future also. With regard to our other friend's question as to why are we looking at the Indo-Pacific strategy from the Indian lens, no, we are not looking at the Indo-Pacific strategy from the Indian lens. We are looking at from our own lens. We are, as I mentioned, that we, the remarks that I made, they do not only relate to Pakistan's foreign policy establishment, but these were the remarks which were based on the conversation that one has with a variety of intellectuals, individuals, people like you, people in the official circles. And that is something that we come to a determination after a careful examination of the pros and cons of every initiative that we take in this foreign policy domain. Thank you.
Thank you, Farhan Bhai. I think I'm the one left to answer the question about this Pakistan economy. I'm not an economist, but I'll say a Punjabi saying, as they say, Jinde kar dane unde kamle bhi seane. If we had this, there will be many challenges that would be off our neck now. If we put our economic situation in order, I'm sure we can do much better in other fields. Now, coming to your question about submarines from China, frankly telling you, I made a paradigm shift after my retirement in October 2014 that I don't indulge myself in any of what I did or what was happening in the past. I try to involve myself in social work through education and vocational training, but still I would answer. Many people ask questions about the Chinese submarines, and one simple way to answer this is, if I do not have enough resources to buy a Mercedes or a BMW, should I not take a Suzuki or perhaps a Corolla? There is no doubt that some countries in the West perhaps produce very high-tech submarines in the world, whereas China may not be at that level yet. But the decision to take Chinese submarine was very deliberate after having seen all the whatever was available. And there are many things that I won't be able to talk on this mic, but I think it will certainly increase the capabilities of the Pakistan Navy once we have these submarines with us. Thank you.
Farhan Saab, thank you very much for this question. Already most of it answered, but I'll address a portion of it. Economy forms the backbone of a country. If you have stronger economy, you can have stronger military policy, you can have stronger foreign policy. All other elements of national power would depend on the economy. As covered by most of the speakers, economy is the biggest challenge. When we resolve this, you can cross many challenges with lesser difficulty. As far as the defense equipment is concerned, under the circumstances, as conceived by the present and the past military doctrines, indigenization being a cheaper option continues to be our path towards this. And future also lies in self-reliance through indigenization. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We take a second round of questions. Please raise your hand so that I can see. Yes, sir, could you please bring a mic here? Amna, could you please bring a mic one in front? Here. Sir, could you please raise your hand to help her identify? Thank you.
I'm Aviam Nasir. My question is directed to Ambassador Olson. US and China relations, diplomatic and economic, they started in late 70s, and the trade in 1979, which started with 4 billion, rose up to 600 billion a couple of years ago. And so is the interdependence, and so is the concern of shift, so is the concern of Indo-Pacific shift and pivot to Asia and etc. My question is that if US could go back in time in early 70s, would it choose to diplomatically and economically engage China in the manner it had done, or would it follow a different pursuit?
Thank you. Zuhaib, in the middle.
My name is Dr. Inam. I extend my warm gratitude and appreciation to the CAST team for organizing such a thought-provoking seminar on a very pertinent issue. My question is for Richard Olson, if he is around. Sir, how do you think that Americans view Pakistan-China strategic partnerships in the larger context, and especially in the context of US Indo-Pacific? And if you have no concerns, no issues, then why time and again Americans raise concerns and observations on our partnership with the Chinese? Thank you.
Thank you. One last question from this round. Yes, sir, please. Zuhaib, could you please bring in this front row?
I am Dr. Anjum Safral. My question is to Ambassador Richard. Sir, this supply of nuclear submarines to Australia, don't you think it is breach of NPT? Initially, it will be, of course, the nuclear propulsion, but it will finally result to SLBMs. Thank you.
So we request Ambassador Olson to answer to these three sets of questions. Ambassador Olson, did you note the questions? The first one is about the interdependence between the US and China that they have enjoyed in the past, and if you look back, how would US look its relationship with China? And the second question is how US views Pakistan-China strategic partnership, and if there are no concerns, then what's the whole fuss about? I mean, if I have interpreted the question correctly. And the third one is AUKUS a violation of the NPT? Could you please briefly answer to these three sets of questions? Over to you.
Yes, so thank you for the questions. The first one, of course, is it's a very big question. I think we could spend a whole day talking about, the trajectory of U.S.-China relations since the 1970s and their impact on the world. The outreach to China in the early 1970s made by the Nixon administration, and specifically by Henry Kissinger, and of course, important to note that Pakistan played a very important role in brokering that relationship. In fact, as I think many know, Henry Kissinger secretly traveled from Natia Ghali to Beijing in order to effect the opening for his first meetings with Zhou Enlai. Look, I think that this is a question that's going to have to be addressed over the course of time by history. My own view is that there has actually been a lot of important cooperation between the United States and China over the course of, however many years it is since we established relations. China was at the time something of an international pariah. It is now. It is not, and no one can deny China's accomplishments during this period of having raised probably 500 million people out of poverty. The question is, is China now on a different trajectory, and is it pursuing policies that are, as I said at the outset, inimical to the United States in certain areas? And I think it is, and I think that the goal of the United States is not to get into a Cold War with China, because as I pointed out in my remarks, I don't think we can. Our economic interdependence is too great. It is to deal in certain areas where we perceive there to be clashes of interest. Ambassador Jalil mentioned the South China Sea, the East China Sea. Those are areas of friction. There are areas of friction in trade and investment, and I think those things have to be worked through in a peaceful manner. And I applaud Ambassador Jilani's call for dialogue. I think that's the way to go forward. On the second question about the relationship between Pakistan and China, look, I think this is really important, and this is where I disagree respectfully with Ambassador Inam. I don't think the U.S. is asking Pakistan to choose between China and the United States. I'm not privy to every diplomatic dialogue, of course, anymore, but I don't think that in private that is the message that's being delivered, and it's certainly not the message that is being delivered in public. And in fact, I would say, we've talked a lot about competition between China and the U.S. today. I think we should be thinking about competition within Asia, amongst the various countries of Asia, about which system they wish to go for. There are two models here. One is the Chinese model of directed investment financed by debt, versus the Western model, if you want to call it that, the G7 model or the US model, which is private sector investment backed by small levels, much more modest levels of grant assistance. I think the countries of the region, including Pakistan, face a choice as to which model they choose to pursue. I think we have felt that it is our right actually to point out what we think are the deficiencies in the other model as we advance our own model. But at the end of the day, the choices are up to the countries. I mean, it's up to the countries of the region whether they are going to go with BRI or B3W, or whether they're going to, as I suspect they will, choose elements of both in their national interest. And I think that's where we wind up. On the question of nuclear submarines, it is only a propulsion system that is on the table right now. That is, and some commentators, it is true, have raised concerns about the nature of the small reactors that fuel nuclear-powered submarines. I'm no expert on that, so I'm reluctant to offer any kind of assessment on that. But there is no discussion that I'm aware of right now of including submarine-launched ballistic missiles, or including active discussion of passing nuclear weaponry technology to Australia. And I think, that's a purely hypothetical situation. So I don't see that there's a violation of the NPT in what is currently being discussed, albeit I would say from a non-expert opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Olson. We are overshooting the time already, but we maybe quickly have one last round of questions. Yes, lady in the back. Mahim, somebody could bring the mic to her. And please identify if somebody from this side wants to ask a question.
Thank you. Thank you to the distinguished panel for a very elaborative discussion. My question is to Ambassador Olson. I wanted to know regarding the Blue Dot Network that you mentioned. Is it a counter to BRI, or is there room for collaboration on the Blue Dot Network and BRI? Thank you.
Thank you. And the gentleman here, over there.
I am Dost Mohammad Badich, Research Associate, Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. I would like to ask a question from Inam ul Haq. My question relates to the artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is going to contribute $15 trillion by 2030. In the meanwhile, China is going to contribute $7 trillion. So how does America view the Chinese growing progress in artificial intelligence? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador Olson. If you could briefly respond to the question directed at you with regards to the Blue Dot Network and its possibility of having some collaboration in future with the BRI, or how do they maneuver? And if I may have the liberty to add that, how do you look at the future prospects of Blue Dot Network, considering that at the very beginning there were some finances problems, and the contribution from the countries were not as much probably in comparison to the BRI. So if you could quickly respond to that before we move to the Ambassador Inam for the last question.
Yeah, well, my understanding of the Blue Dot Network is that it is essentially a certification process for projects, and it involves certifying certain development projects, primarily undertaken by the private sector, to assure that they reach a certain level of quality and standards and things like that. And so, in a way, it's what we would in the United States call a good housekeeping seal of approval on a specific set of projects. So I guess the way one has to think about this is, would there be a possibility that a BRI project could be certified by the Blue Dot Network? And I don't really know the answer to that question. I mean, I think that's an interesting question. I don't think it's come up. And I suppose that would be the test as to how compatible the systems are. I would say, from the perspective of the Blue Dot Network and its successor in a way, BW3 or B3W rather, is that these are projects that it's an opportunity for all. But it is, as I mentioned in my last set of remarks, they have a different investment approach behind BRI and B3W. One is private sector driven, B3W, and the other is a case of directed investment financed by debt. So I think at the end of the day, yes, there are going to be choices for the countries involved on the various as they choose projects.
Thank you, Ambassador Inam. Could you please?
First, a clarification, Ambassador Olson. I did not use the word choosing between the two. I said that the United States is perhaps expecting Pakistan to distance itself from China in some ways. CPEC is one example. The United States has opposed CPEC on various grounds. One of those has been the debt trap, so-called debt trap that China is laying for developing countries. I was reading the debt statistics of Pakistan recently, foreign debt statistics. Pakistan owes a total of $122 billion to foreign creditors. Of that, almost $100 billion is owed to Western countries and to multilateral financial institutions like the IMF, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, bond markets, etc. And about $24 billion in all is owed to China. So if there is a debt trap, that trap is from the Western countries for the time being. It may eventually be that China's debt increases and we are not able to repay it. But so far, the Western debt that Pakistan owes is 5 times the size of Chinese debt. On the issue of B3W and the BRI, I would like to say that B3W is still a concept. The European Union has come up with a proposal for a $46 billion package, which is calling a global initiative. Most of it is going to be spent elsewhere, not in this area, not in South Asia. So we are not going to gain much from B3W. BRI, of course, is spread over more than 60 countries, and it's a $1 trillion project. So the $46 billion pledged by the US, pledged by the Europeans, are peanuts compared to $1 trillion. The United States has not yet indicated any amount to be subscribed to B3W projects. The third question was regarding artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is in its initial stages. It has both military and civilian uses. The United States, the Western countries, and China are competing with each other in research and development of artificial intelligence. It still remains to be seen who emerges as a winner. For the time being, it is being projected that perhaps China is a little ahead of the United States in terms of artificial intelligence. It will have many uses, and we'll have to wait and see how it works out to the advantage of these countries, as well as to the advantage or disadvantage of developing world. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Inam. I understand that there are more people interested in asking in question, but in consideration of the time, we might have to end the question and answer session here. I would want to thank all worthy speakers and the participants for their contribution. With this, our seminar comes to a close. I request President CAS Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan for the final vote of thanks to formally close this seminar. Please come over, sir.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. After this long session, I'm not going to take any time for any more talk. Let me thank 3 important pillars of the seminar. First of all, our honorable panel, very rich experience, very elaborate and enlightening talk by all of them. My personal thanks to Ambassador Inam Ambassador Jilani, Ambassador Olson, and of course our honorable former Chief of the Naval Staff, Admiral Sandila, for an outstanding discourse on his part of subject. And Senator Sherry Rehman, who's not here, he had to go for some other commitment. And all of you for coming, taking out time and being with us, listening to all this. I hope when we get up from here, we go back a little more informed on the subject. And that was the effort that CAS had made. If we achieve that, we would be successful in our endeavor. And last, the CAS team, which arranged all this, I'm witness to all this. It has been a very, very gigantic effort to manage such a big seminar. Thank you very much for the CAS team also. And with that, we come to the formal end of the proceedings. Thank you.
I now request President Cass to kindly present the mementos to all the distinguished panelists. First, I request Admiral Mohammad Asif Sandila to please receive your memento. Now, I request Ambassador Inam to please receive your memento. I request Ambassador Jalil Abbas Jilani to please receive your memento. I now request President Cass and all the worthy panelists to please join us on the stage for a group photograph. And Cass team as well.